Okay, well, it's Thursday, which means that you're up for more videos. And I know that the last couple of videos have been, well, they've just been, okay? And the idea was not to bring everything down, it wasn't all that. I do have, especially in this video, something to get really nerdy about. But also, the thing about this video is it is true. What the title says. This is the beginning of a thing that has really continued to be a thing, but it's also the last of some things that were very important to me in my high school life. So those all start to crush together, along with a choir memory thrown in. But again, not everything is fine and dandy. But, in case you haven't noticed, here I am. So, thank you again for joining me in this jump down memory lane. I would say excuse the dogs in the background as they come in and out, but you know, low-tech recording. Here we go. If you want blood, you got it. In late January, early February of 2002, I turned my writing into a new creative project. I created a wrestling promotion, the Wrestling Federation of America, based out of Phoenix, but one that would tour nationally. I've been a professional wrestling fan since I was little. And like when I say little, I mean like 3 years old. See, living in Woodhull, there was a guy in the neighborhood, Benny, who was a barber, and he ran his barber shop out of his house. And when you came to get your hair cut, he would have ESPN on. And I watched wrestling, the AWA, on ESPN while getting my hair cut as a kid. I loved interacting with it, and so my dad started to see that, this little thing had began to grow. And listen, it was the height of the WWF Golden Age, and Hulk Hogan, and the Ultimate Warrior, and the Macho Man. So my dad would tape WWF's Saturday Night's main event late on Saturday night so that I could watch it on Sunday mornings. I'd get the big rubber wrestler toys. Friends and I would wrestle, fighting off vicious opponents such as stuffed animals or pillows, or, even the worst guys, the invisible shadow men. As I grew up, I used toys and gave them different names, give them new gimmicks and personalities. I'd create my own little shows, write down ideas, and when I reached about junior high and became friends with Nathan M., number 2, the one that dated Pam, we became partners and opponents. He was Nathan the Tiger Moberg, and I was Matt the Whirlwind Wentz. Because, we were 12 and 13, and it worked. We watched wrestling, we practiced wrestling, and, for being pre-teenage kids, us and the other kids in the neighborhood, we weren't half bad. My junior year of high school, though, I'd started to create what would be the basis of my own wrestling universe that would come to fruition with this writing that I was now doing. And thanks to wrestling games like WWF No Mercy, my true professional wrestling persona came out. He would walk to the ring to AC/DC's Thunderstruck. He was the blue and white, face-painted, blue t-shirt and black workout pants-clad hero known as Kid Cage. Okay, listen. The name may have left something to be desired, but the creation of it came from a bit of an amalgamation. It just came out once and stuck. Steel cage matches have long been seen as this big, epic match to end a pro wrestling feud, so that was part of it. And as simple as it may sound, the kid part came from my dad. The nickname he gave me since I was about 5 or 6. The nickname actually comes from all places, the Disney film Dick Tracy, of the boy who helps Warren Beatty's character and, spoiler alert, is adopted by him at the end of the film. The nickname Kid Cage just sounded cool, so much so that I created an email handle, one that I still have to this day. I would create this alternate version of me, complete with his finisher, the Thunder Cage, and put him in action against the WWF wrestlers in video games. And it was also here where Putman and I really found a kindred brotherhood. Putman and I would watch wrestling and talk wrestling, and with a love of horror films, would also sometimes get into the more hardcore wrestling. Matches with less rules and more blood and weapons. And it was thanks to some tapes we were introduced to the Japanese promotion Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, FMW for short. They had high-flying wrestlers like Hayabusa, tough-as-nails wrestlers like Masato Tanaka, and then they had death matches with horror-inspired wrestlers like Jason the Terrible, Super Leather, and Mr. Pogo. And these were the ones that drew us in. Okay, seeing guys getting hit with chairs in the WWF every Monday was one thing. Mr. Pogo taking a scythe out of a bag wrapped in a chain and stabbing a guy in the back before carving up his forehead? This was new. I think I found my inspiration, Putman said. Mr. Pogo is amazing. Mr. Pogo would usually have like a black and blue or black and green face paint, a pair of camo shorts, and usually a Bad Boy Club t-shirt. He was not a fancy wrestler, but had an array of weapons and would throw fireballs at his opponents. He wrestled in barbed wire fights or boards of nails or whatever he could find, and Putman was hooked. And his alternate ego, Pogo, was born. Clad in red and black camo and face paint, a black torn t-shirt, Putman, he now had his identity. And shortly thereafter, we roped Blaine in, and Blaine, though he was going to be a bit of a daredevil, jumping off the top rope and ladders and taking the name Nathan Dragonfire Blaine, our pro wrestling-inspired trio was created. In stars, I was the creative guy who tied everyone together. Blaine was our outgoing jokester personality guy, and Putman was sometimes impulsive and a bit of the butt of the jokes. But Omega? Pogo was the muscle and the violence. Blaine was the daredevil who never saw limits. And Kid Cage? As much as you might make him bleed, as much as you broke him or bruised him, he'd never quit. No matter what, he'd find a way to get up, to come back from defeat, to make the save when needed the most. He'd always find a way to win, and you could always count on him. And so, the wrestler names and ideas I created over the years, I began to fully develop, and characters began to come to life. Kid Cage, my heroic wrestling alter ego, would be involved in the beginning. Blaine and Putman were themselves, playing backstage interview character, play-by-play commentator, respectfully. Within weeks, I gave Putman his Pogo persona and immediately introduced him as a violent anti-hero. As I sat at my computer to begin writing the beginnings of the promotion, I scoured my music collection for entrance music for each wrestler, playing it as I wrote. I created Russian powerhouse heroes, a mysterious Japanese tag team, a monster slasher movie-inspired bad guy, and an all-American hero. Brawlers and technicians and high flyers, they were all there, and I created a roster full of colorful characters I put into combat with each other. I poured what I could into it, writing out matches and shows and interviews. Here, I had control and could be the hero I wanted to be. The hero I craved to be. It was also the home of another creation. Because if a promotion had a hero, it needed a villain. With everything going on in my brain, I felt like I had no choice. I created the most violent thing I could. A scarred powerhouse wielding a chair wrapped in barbed wire. Wearing a pair of blood-red pants and a red face mask, I gave him the entrance music Bat Outta Hell by Meatloaf and the name Bloodstar. his name was also inspired from memories I have of my dad, but this time through high school. My dad played computer games like Diablo and Diablo 2, and I would spend hours hanging out and watching him. And Bloodstar was the name of a spell. It sounded cool, and for a villain, it was perfect. He needed to reflect everything I felt myself going through, and was going to be the creative version of what I saw as my reality. He was my cutting personified. He was my anger, my depression, and my confusion. He was the ultimate villain. He was the manifestation of my own demons, my own shortcomings, my faults, and my fears. He would feel little pain and show less mercy. He was bloodthirsty, violent, and would stop at nothing to hurt people, and he only had one goal in mind. He was there to make me bleed. If I leave here tomorrow, will you still remember me? The last of my NAU Jazz Mad competitions were on February 8th and 9th of 2002. And we headed up the day before from school. Zan and I rode together, along with Stephen B. and Emily and Kate, Jackie, Brandon, David, and Corey. And, once again, Mr. Werner at the helm. Arriving for the competition was bittersweet, as I had truly enjoyed the previous 2 years with all the weirdness that had gone on with them. And as we got our room assignments, Zan, David, Corey, and I were all in a room together. And in a moment of senior pride, I got to call dibs on one of the actual beds in the bedroom, Zan taking the other. David and Corey were good sports, agreeing to take the pull-out couch in the living room. We got settled in, had dinner as a choir, and readied for our performing the next day. Performing the next day, we decided on performing the upcoming spring concert set for our jazz portion, which included Blue Skies, More Than You Know, and Baby Driver, which spotlighted Brandon A. and Shell and Stephen C. and David doing solo work. We settled down into our seats, and the choir who preceded us was our friendly rivals, Corona, who took the stage. They did their first two pieces, then announced for their final piece they would be doing Chili Con Carne. Our returning group of Downbeat grinned, having done the piece the year before. We wanted to see how Corona did it. And as they sang and got to a solo part, we heard one of their choir members call out, "We don't need no stinking chicken." Wendy shot a look at me. I shot a look at her. And then we both looked at Brandon A. They had inserted a callback to Brandon's solo at NAU the year before. I playfully started cracking my knuckles, ready for a fight, and Wendy mouthed, "Oh, it's on!" We all chuckled and gave applause when Corona finished, some of us clucking as we did so. We followed Corona a few choirs later, energized by their playful jab at us. We sang our pieces, and once finished, got to our critique. We were awarding a standing of superior, the highest one can get in a competition like such. We also made sure to mention it, a little louder than normal voice when we were around Corona afterward. Downbeat then gathered in the lobby to take our professional group photos. The first of us, all professional and standing. The second, though, always the funny one, is just a wild free-for-all. The three Brandons and Stephen A. grouped together, Emily, Kate, and Jackie, are lining up and lifting up their skirts or dresses in this little, fun showing leg pose. Shell, Jennifer, and Wendy are together, while Diana, Maddie, Natalie, and Teresa are front and center. Then, there's the rest of us guys. Xandar lifted David and held him like a baby as he covered his face. Corey and Stephen B. are grouped together, leaning on me, and I'm holding out my tuxedo cummerbund like it's a wrestling belt, tongue out like a wild madman. We let out a healthy laugh when it was done, and we headed back to the hotel to change. It was time to go to church. And for me, the third and final time. We headed up to the Chapel of the Holy Cross in Sedona first, stopping first, though, for lunch at a McDonald's. Our choir contingent all went in and ordered food, and as orders were handed out, sat down. As the last one ordering, I found myself a kid without a table, looking as Zan sat down with Emily, Kate, and Jackie. Over here, Mr. President, I heard Wendy call out, and I turned. She motioned to the seat across from her at the two-seat table, and I sat down. Thanks, I replied. What'd you think of Corona singing? She asked with a grin. I laughed. I mean, I'm glad we influenced them. We chatted a bit more about performing and the choirs we saw, and as we ate. We jumped around topics and watched the rest of the choir all interacting, and she leaned back in her seat. What do you plan on doing? She asked me, once the year is over. What's in store for Matt Wintz after high school? I mean, in my heart I'm a writer and a singer. I don't know, I'd love to be a teacher, I said. You'd be good at that, she responded. Yeah, maybe. I don't know, maybe even a choir director. She raised an eyebrow. You'd be good at that, too. Just gonna have to see how it goes between now and then, I said, eating a fry. Are you doing okay? Wendy asked. It's been a rough year, I replied. She nodded. I know. We sat there for a little while, and I crumpled up my burger wrapper and took a drink. You know my door is open if you need to talk, she said, and not just about the choir stuff. I nodded. Thanks. I'll be all right. I'm always fine when I'm on stage, though. That, she said, is never where I'm worried about you. I grinned. Thanks, boss. Our last NAU trip, she said, and I nodded. We touched our cups together in a toast. Wendy had revealed that it was maybe her last year at Mountain Point, and even though it hadn't been finalized, it was believed to be a done deal. We sat and talked more, finished our lunch, and as I took our trays and threw away our garbage, she assembled the rest of the choir. We piled into the vans and headed up to the chapel. When we got there, we all walked the winding ramp up to the chapel, and we asked Wendy if she'd gotten permission for us to sing. She said she hadn't, but whether we did was up to us. We stepped into the church together, and Wendy gave us a talk about what the trips had meant to her in the past, and what her leaving meant, that this had become such a place she looked forward to. She pointed out how Stephen B. and I had been in Downbeat with her since the beginning, and how going forward she was proud of all of us. As we stood together in the church, she got a bit emotional and excused herself, stepping out. We were in a circle, and I stood next to Zan and reached into my pocket. I pulled out the pitch pipe. Adoramoste? One last time? I asked, and I was met with nods. Play our note, Matt, Kate responded. I blew it, and Kate reached out her hand, and I took it, and Zan took my other one. We allowed ourselves to just let go for 2 minutes. And that's all it took to sing the song, and when we were done, we took another minute to gather our emotions. We exchanged hugs, and as we did, we took time just to look out around the chapel. Some sat and prayed. Xandar went down to the gift shop, and I turned to see Wendy, standing in the door of the church, smiling. We all got back together, and she cleared her throat. Let's get a picture of you, she said, and we all gathered around. Zan and Stephen C. and Corey, Brandon A., Stephen B., Kate, Wendy, Emily, Jackie stood in the back row. David, Brandon M., Brandon B., Jennifer, Shell, Maddie, Natalie, Teresa, and Diana in the front. And then me, taking a knee, and a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt in the very front, as Mr. Warner snapped the photo. As the underclassmen stepped out with Wendy, she grabbed the cameras that were handed to her. All right, seniors, your turn. This is weird, I thought, as we lined up. Shell sat in the front. The Stevens stood together, the Brandons, and then Kate stepped in front of me and I put my arms on her shoulders. Zan leaned into me, and Emily stood on the bench behind us, putting her arm on my back. Wendy snapped a series of photos and gave us a 5-minute warning. We looked out at the desert and Xandar handed me something. A bottle of holy water from the gift shop. For vampires and the other unholy things that you fight, he said. Thank you, bro, I said, sliding it into my pocket. As we began the walk down, Emily and I stopped. Would you take a picture with me, I asked? And I felt a little nervous asking it. Of course, Emily said with a smile. I handed Xandar my camera and I stood next to Emily. She was sitting on the ledge with her purse and she slid her arm into mine as I leaned. Xandar gave us a count, we smiled, and he snapped the photo. Her and my last photo. I helped her off the ledge and we walked down together, getting into the vans and heading back to the hotel so we could pack up and go home. We all returned to the valley that Saturday the 9th, the night of coronation. Unlike years past, the dance I always saw as the most memorable through high school. I don't remember a fucking thing about it. And there we shall walk in endless light. One of the things about my senior year I do remember is that while I personally was feeling myself spiral downward, musically I was having my best year. This was reflected when I made the Arizona Music Educators Association West Region Choir, a choir that oversaw hundreds of students audition for. When I'd received my scores, I had been one single point away from a perfect score, and I was surprised. I hadn't felt like I'd had that sort of ability to be considered, and my mindset had become anything but positive when it came to these things. The Mountain Point contingent for the choir that year saw myself and David Dote chosen as part of the bass section. Maddie, Heather M., who was Crystal's sister, Jenny M., Kenlyn, and Kate were chosen as sopranos. Shell was the lone alto selected, and Brandon A., Stephen B., John D., and Corey were selected as tenors. There were 25 selected per section, and we would do 6 songs as part of our set. Regional rehearsals took over 2 days, with the second day, February 16th, being the day of the performance at our host high school, Skyline High. As we practiced, I struck up a friendship with a few of the basses in my section, Ben, Thor, and Jay. The 4 of us quickly got along. We were natural baritones. As we rehearsed the assortment we would sing, it became abundantly clear that one song, "O Day Full of Grace," was becoming a favorite of the choir, and the electricity was there once again. Music was going to do something really fucking cool. 3 of the songs were more classical, one of which, Damon Erept Kalidis, was one we at Mountain Point had planned to do for our upcoming spring concert. Another was more fun, happy-go-lucky song entitled "What Would You Do If You Married a Soldier?" But we kept coming back to "O Day Full of Grace" with such dedication and power that the director decided to change up the order of the songs, making it our finale. During our practices, my 3 bass buddies and I found a baritone note right toward the end of it that seemed to be optional, as the director had made no announcements of who would take it, so the 4 of us just agreed to do it. When we did, the director completed the song and asked the simple question, who held the baritone note? We looked at each other and raised our hands, and the director smiled. Gentlemen, the note is yours. We exchanged smiles again and agreed that we would make sure no one would miss that note. The day of the concert, Wendy sat in the audience with my parents, and as we made it on stage, we were all ready to go. We brought our music with us and went through the songs with a few members of the choir, Stephen included, doing some improvised comedic looks and movements during "What Would You Do If You Married a Soldier?" The movements had never been negatively addressed by the director. He seemed to welcome it, but Wendy did not. It was the Monday after regionals that Wendy dismissed Stephen from Downbeat for performing the moves. A decision that seemed harsh, but it was final. When it came time for "O Day," we put our music folders away. We had this one memorized. The song is a beautiful, religious song that starts low and quiet and grows. And as we continued in the journey, smiles were exchanged from each of us in the choir. Choir members from Mountain Point sang alongside ones from Corona and others. The fun rivalries replaced by just the joy of singing. As we worked our way to the crescendo singing the finale, and we sang, "And there we shall walk in endless light, in light," as all the choir all cut out, there were the four of us baritones, holding that note for light. On the recording, it still just gives me goosebumps as we hold the note, four lone voices for about 2 seconds before the rest of the choir rejoins for the final notes. In terms of classical singing, outside of Hallelujah Chorus, it was the coolest fucking thing I had done in all of my years of choir. But if we are wise, we know there's always tomorrow. March 5th, 2002 was the spring concert for the Mountain Point Choir. A week before spring break and just about a month from our tour of California. As was customary, the week of performing, we were in the auditorium for rehearsals, and the Tuesday date of the concert, we were practicing with the band, who was hired to play along with the assorted choirs when necessary. For Downbeat, that would be our jazz trio, and we would sing the same 3 jazz tunes from our Jazz Mad trip. During rehearsal, though, we finished Baby Driver, and Wendy wanted to go over a few things with the band. We were all standing around on stage, and we just started singing together, "Lean on Me." Here we were, just killing time, singing a song on stage and having a blast, our little family, as we all intermingled and nudged each other. Wendy clapped her hands to get our attention, and we faded the song out, getting back into formation and going over our songs one more time. As our rehearsal ended and we waited for a cappella, the piano player from the band caught some of our attention. "You guys were sounding really great," he said. "You should be singing that song." "That's just us messing around," I responded, "but hey, if you play it, we'd probably sing it." That night, we all piled into the auditorium for our concert. Our tech crew were putting up risers and mics and speakers, and time warp in the dressing room was done, and the last run-throughs were completed, and the curtain came up. Downbeat kicked off with our classical selection. Encore would follow, along with the combined songs from men's chorus, and then men's chorus did their own pieces. Zan and I cheered for Putman on the side of the stage as he had a solo. Downbeat took the stage for jazz. And we did mic checks as the men handed the ladies all their microphones. Brandon A. and Shell and Stephen C. did their solos for Blue Skies. More Than You Know was the follow-up, and then Stephen C. and David did their solos for Baby Driver, which also saw quite a bit of band solos, which we cheered for in the breaks. As soon as the last note for Baby Driver was hit, and we cut off the note, the piano came to life with the opening chords to Lean on Me. Wendy looked around confused. The choir smiled, and she threw up her hands with a grin. "All right, screw it," she said, which is picked up on the recording. Downbeat sang the first verse of the song, and the audience began clapping rhythm. We'd all started to mix together, Zan putting his arm around me and me putting mine around David. We all joined together, singing one of the ultimate friendship songs. A song sung to those who, you know, are troubled, that no matter what they are going through, they have a place to lean. Standing there singing with my friends, it felt poetic. But I still struggled with it. As Wendy called for us to finish the song, we did, coming to the end on some makeshift harmony, and the crowd went nuts. Much like our Downbeat improvisation the year before in Pops, it was this, the unscripted break from the program, that garnered the biggest reaction. We all exchanged high fives drawn together by our singing and friendship. Listening back, it is amazing and heartfelt, and such this moment of all of us coming together and bringing the audience along for the ride. At that moment, though, I still felt alone. And that's the end of the story today. For the record, Kid Cage is still a half decent name, and yes, I still own an email account with that name. So, you know, longevity is a thing. But it is also the end of things. NAU was always a lot of fun. And then I had to take a senior picture. The first of a few. I will give you this. The next video is a little rough. Just remember, be good to yourself. And keep on rolling.